In the heart of Manhattan, inside a restaurant where every chair was a throne, there was one table servers whispered about. A table that ruined nights, crushed tips, and left shadows long after the candles died out. But one night that cursed corner became the battlefield between a billionaire who thought he owned the world and a waitress who carried scars no one could see. The place was called the Golden Heron. To the city's elite, it wasn't just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary, a stage where power dressed itself in velvet and crystal. Mahogany panels gleamed like polished stone, and chandeliers dripped light like molten gold onto linen as white as snowfall. Voices here were never raised. They hummed low and steady, a chorus of influence behind closed doors. Even the air was perfumed with roasted garlic-aged wine, and the faintest trace of cigar smoke carried in from men who thought the night belonged to them. Every table in the room was a throne for someone, every table except one. Table 14. It sat tucked away in a dim alcove near the service corridor, half hidden in the shadow of an exit door. The draft that slipped through the cracks could sour even the finest Bordeaux, and the acoustics carried whispers from other tables, but devoured the voices of those who sat there. Staff called it the Orphan. Some said a couple once got engaged there and broke up a week later. Others remembered a businessman who fell ill over dessert, never to return. Tips at table 14 were always miserable. No one wanted it, not even the most desperate of new hires. But that night, with the restaurant overbooked and every polished corner filled, fate turned its gaze to the orphan table. The staff traded nervous glances, praying not to be chosen. And then there was Evelyn Carter. She was 29, with pale, intelligent eyes that seemed to notice everything and reveal nothing. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, practical knot, her uniform crisp and flawless. While others moved with flare-cracking jokes, sharing gossip in the corners, Evelyn glided quietly between tables. She was the kind of server managers adored, never late, never careless, never dramatic. Invisible to most patrons, but indispensable to the house. She carried herself like someone who had walked through storms and learned to move in silence. To her co-workers, she was simply reliable. To those who looked closer, she was unbreakable. That evening, as candles flickered against the velvet walls and the chandeliers hummed with light, Evelyn Carter was about to step into the shadow of table 14. And what waited for her there would be more than a difficult guest. It would be a reckoning years in the making. The Golden Heron was already full that night, every table occupied by men and women who measured their lives in contracts and dividends. The staff moved with the rhythm of a symphony, waiters, gliding bus boys sweeping the manager, nodding like a conductor, keeping it all in time. Then the doors opened with a force that bent the entire atmosphere of the room. A hush rippled outward. The newcomer wasn't loud, but his presence spoke louder than any voice. Victor Blackstone had arrived. He was not a large man, lean, wiry, with the kind of body that suggested calculation rather than brute force. But his very posture radiated menace. His hair, silver at the temples, was cut with ruthless precision, as if every strand feared to step out of line. His face was all hard edges and sharp planes, and his eyes, icy, predatory blue, searched the room like a hawk scanning for prey. Wherever they landed, laughter-dimmed shoulders stiffened, and the very air seemed to draw colder. Trailing one step behind was his assistant, Michael Gray. A man in his late 30s, though his anxious eyes made him look older. He clutched a leather briefcase to his chest as if it were a shield. His movements were small, tentative, every gesture calculated to avoid displeasing the man in front of him. To anyone watching it was clear Michael Gray lived in the long shadow cast by Victor Blackstone. At the host stand, the seasoned manager, Mr. Roberts, greeted them with the kind of professional smile that masked a spike of dread. He had heard stories, of course, every restaurant in the city had. Blackstone humiliating servers until they quit mid-shift, firing chefs through whispered threats to investors leaving entire staffs in tears. "We are honored to have you with us, Mr. Blackstone," Roberts said, his voice steady, though his hands betrayed a faint tremor. "Your table is ready." Blackstone's eyes swept the dining room. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the welcome. He simply allowed himself to be led across the floor. Every step he took seemed to drain warmth from the golden walls. When Roberts slowed near the shadowed alcove, Blackstone stopped cold. "Table 14, Roberts said softly, gesturing. The cursed table waited. The draft stirred a linen napkin, a whisper of warning from the corridor beyond. Blackstone's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smirk. "This will do," he muttered, as though condescending to fate itself. He shrugged out of his overcoat, tossing it carelessly onto the empty chair. Michael hurried to retrieve it before it slid to the floor. From the shadows of the service station, Evelyn Carter watched. Her heartbeat quickened, steady but strong. She had known the night would bring trouble. She hadn't known it would bring him. Blackstone did not look at her as she approached. He didn't even seem to see her. To him, she was furniture, just another part of the scenery. Water, he commanded to the air, his voice low and gravelly. "Sparkling, Italian. And make sure it hasn't been opened longer than 5 minutes." Michael cleared his throat timidly. "Still for me, please." "Of course, gentlemen," Evelyn replied, her tone calm, neutral, carrying no trace of emotion. She neither hurried nor lingered, gliding away with the same measured grace as before. Blackstone drummed his fingers on the tablecloth, eyes, cold a predator, testing the perimeter of his cage. His first order had been given, his first test laid down. He was ready to play his game, and Evelyn Carter, though she did not yet know it, was ready to end it. Evelyn Carter returned to table 14, armed with the only weapons she trusted, flawless precision and unwavering composure. She replaced the standard stemware with fine crystal polished, until the candlelight shimmered through it like starlight. Every fork was set at the exact angle, every plate aligned with military symmetry. If Victor Blackstone wanted a battlefield, then this table would be hers to command. The first volley came swiftly. Blackstone tore off a piece of the sourdough bread placed before him. He pressed it between his fingers, studied it as if it were a failed experiment, and dropped it back into the basket with disdain. "It's cold," he said flatly. "Tell your baker to wake up." Evelyn inclined her head. "I'll bring you a fresh, warm basket immediately, sir." Her voice was as smooth as the linen draped across the table. No apology, no hesitation. She carried the bread away, replaced it with a basket warmed to the touch, and set it down before him. Blackstone tore off another piece, chewed slowly, then gave the smallest nod. Better. The word sounded less like praise and more like a judgment passed. Moments later, the appetizers arrived, seared scallops for Michael Gray, arranged in delicate saffron risotto. Blackstone, however, had ordered nothing. He watched Michael lift his fork, then, with calculated cruelty, reached across the table, plucked a scallop from his assistant's plate, and slid it into his own mouth. He chewed, then grimaced theatrically. "Rubbery," he declared, "and the risotto bland. My compliments to your chef on achieving spectacular mediocrity." The insult was a dagger aimed not only at the kitchen, but at Evelyn herself, the messenger forced to deliver it. She bowed her head slightly. "I'll be sure to share your feedback, sir." Inside the kitchen, she softened the words into something less venomous, protecting both her chef and the fragile balance of the evening. But in her chest, a faint tremor stirred. A flicker of memory, her father's tired face, the courtroom where his life's work had been dismantled by men who sneered the same way Blackstone sneered now. She steadied her breath. The mask held. Then came the test he had been saving. Blackstone snatched the wine list from Evelyn's hands, flipping through it with visible boredom. "Is this it? A child's collection of overpriced labels?" He glanced up at her with eyes like frozen steel. Do you even have a sommelier, or do you let the dishwashers choose? Evelyn's expression didn't waver. Our sommelier is available, sir, if you'd like his recommendation. I don't want a recommendation, he snapped. I want a bottle of 1982 Petrus. He slammed the list shut with a sharp crack. The demand hung heavy in the alcove. The 1982 Petrus was legend rare astronomical in price and almost never available without months of notice. It was a cruel game, one she was never meant to win. Evelyn's voice remained calm, her words measured and deliberate. An excellent choice, sir. A remarkable year for Pomerol. Unfortunately, our cellar does not carry the 82 this evening. However, she leaned in just slightly, her tone firm but respectful. Chef recently secured a small allocation of the 2005 Chateau l'Evangile. It has similar depth and structure with a touch more graphite on the finish. Many consider it one of the finest modern vintages. For the first time all night, silence fell at the table. Michael Gray blinked in surprise, his fork suspended midair. Blackstone narrowed his eyes. He had expected stammering apologies, perhaps the manager rushing in to cover the embarrassment. He had not expected knowledge. He had not expected competence. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, surprise, maybe even respect, before it vanished beneath a new scowl. Fine, he muttered. Bring your l'Evangile. But if it's corked, I'll have the bill sent to your chef. Yes, sir, Evelyn said, her voice unshaken. She turned and walked away, her steps light, steady. But inside, beneath the armor of professionalism, the tremor of memory pressed harder. Her father's face, his voice warning her about men who lived by conquest. The memory was sharp, too sharp. Yet still she held the mask. And as she returned with the chosen bottle, uncorked it with perfect silence, and poured the first glass, the tension in the alcove thickened. Victor Blackstone was testing her strength, searching for cracks. Evelyn Carter, though trembling beneath the surface, gave him none. The entrees arrived with the grace of a practiced ballet. Michael's filet mignon glistened, seared perfectly to a medium, rare the aroma of butter and thyme rising in a fragrant cloud. Before him, Victor's roasted duck rested in a glossy reduction of cherry and red wine, the kind of dish that chefs labored over for hours to perfect. Evelyn placed each plate with steady hands, retreating a step to let them taste. For a moment, there was silence. Victor carved a sliver of duck, lifted it to his lips, and chewed once, twice. Then he stopped. The silverware clattered against porcelain as he dropped it, the sound ringing sharp in the alcove. What is this? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. It's the roasted duck, Sir, Evelyn replied evenly. I know what it's supposed to be, he snapped. His tone dripped venom. This is leather drowned in cough syrup, overcooked, sacrilegious. Take it back. He gestured toward Michael's plate. Take them both back. My associate has lost his appetite as well. Michael froze, fork in hand. His face was pale, confused. But it's wonderful, Victor. Victor's gaze turned on him, a glacier in motion. Are you contradicting me? His voice dropped to a whisper so sharp it cut through the air. Michael's courage withered. No, of course not, he stammered, pushing the untouched steak away with trembling hands. Evelyn looked at the 2 plates of food masterpieces reduced to casualties of one man's cruelty. She looked at Michael's humiliated face, the way his shoulders curled inward like a scolded child. Then her gaze rose slowly, inexorably, to meet Victor Blackstone's cold blue eyes. Something deep inside her gave way. For years she had built walls of silence and discipline, hiding the truth of who she was hiding, nay, the grief that had hollowed her life. But the sight of those untouched plates, the waste, the contempt, it shattered the dam she had built inside herself. The past surged forward with merciless clarity. She remembered her father, Jonathan Carter, an architect of rare integrity, whose firm once stood as a beacon of honest design. She remembered the courtroom where she sat in the back row, powerless watching, as Victor Blackstone and his allies twisted lies into law. She remembered the false reports, the panic in the markets the day her father walked out of the courthouse with his spirit broken. And she remembered one detail above all: the blue Hermes tie that Blackstone wore on the witness stand. Anchors woven into silk, gleaming under the sterile courtroom lights, as he denied every accusation with smooth, practiced lies. The image burned in her mind like a brand. Evelyn reached down and lifted both plates from the table. She did not flinch, did not tremble. She set them aside with deliberate calm. Then she turned back to Victor. For the first time that night, her eyes met his without retreat. The quiet server's mask slipped away, and in its place stood something unyielding, forged in years of loss. Her voice was steady, but it carried a weight that seemed to still the draft itself. "My name," she said, "is not Evelyn the waitress." She leaned closer, every word deliberate, unmistakable. "My name is Evelyn Carter, daughter of Jonathan Carter." The name struck the table like a bell, resonating in the silence that followed. For the first time all evening, Victor Blackstone's smirk faltered. The battle for table 14 had truly begun. The alcove seemed to shrink, its shadows pressing inward, as Evelyn Carter stood her ground. Her hands, steady now, reached into the pocket of her apron. She withdrew a small folded sheet of paper, its edges softened by time, the creases worn from being opened and closed in silence over the years. She didn't wave it in the air or brandish it like a weapon. Instead, she laid it gently on the white tablecloth, sliding it until it rested beside Victor Blackstone's glass of sparkling water. "Do you recognize it?" she asked quietly. Victor's eyes flicked down. His fingers twitched, but he didn't touch the paper. He didn't have to. He knew the shape of his own sins. It was a copy of an internal memo, dated and signed, detailing a meeting between Blackstone and Sterling Investments. It outlined a strategy, one designed to bleed Carter architecture dry. Coordinated rumors, a falsified report on the North Shore project, a manufactured panic among investors. It was all there in black and white. Victor Blackstone froze. The color drained from his face as if someone had siphoned it out. His lips parted, but no words came. The arrogance that had filled every gesture, every glance, melted away. His hands, once so certain, trembled where they rested on the table. The predator was cornered. Across from him, Michael Gray stared, stunned. He had known his employer was ruthless, but this was something else. Fraud, conspiracy, the destruction of families and livelihoods. He had served the man for years without ever seeing the depths of the rot beneath the polish. His fork lay abandoned, forgotten, as his eyes darted from the paper to Victor, searching for some explanation that would not come. Evelyn's voice cut through the silence like a blade honed on grief. 5 years ago, my father sat in that courtroom, accused of negligence, stripped of the company he built with his own hands. He had designed buildings meant to stand for generations, but you reduced him to rubble with a whisper. You fed lies to the press, leaked forged reports, and when the dust settled, you walked away with his life's work in your pocket. Her gaze didn't waver. My father, Jonathan Carter, died 2 years later. Not from illness, not from age, from the weight you placed on his shoulders. You killed him slowly with ink and signatures, and the smug lies that poured out of your mouth while you wore a blue Hermes tie with anchors on it. The detail struck home. Victor's eyes widened. He remembered that tie. He remembered that day. The restaurant around them carried on, oblivious the clink of glasses, the murmur of laughter, the faint notes of music from the main room. But inside the alcove, time stood still. The balance of power had shifted. Victor Blackstone, master of boardrooms and destroyer of companies, sat wordless before a waitress who was no longer just a waitress. His voice, his weapon, failed him. He opened his mouth, but nothing emerged. For the first time in years, Victor Blackstone was utterly, completely speechless. The silence at table 14 grew heavy, pressing down on the linen and crystal like a storm cloud, refusing to break. Victor Blackstone sat rigid, his pale eyes locked on the folded paper that had shattered his composure. His lips trembled, but no words came. The predator looked suddenly small, as if time had leapt forwards and left him aged in its wake. Then came the smallest sound. Michael Gray, who had been frozen for so long, lifted his fork. He cut into his filet mignon, now lukewarm, the juices dulled, but still rich. He placed the bite into his mouth, chewed slowly, then swallowed. "It's excellent," he said, his voice steady. The words were quiet, but in the alcove they thundered. For the first time in 8 years of servitude, Michael had contradicted his master. It was rebellion in miniature, but rebellion all the same. Victor's head turned sharply, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked from Michael back to Evelyn, as if the world had betrayed him in unison. His voice, when it came, was no longer a blade. It was a rasp. "What do you want?" The eternal question of the powerful when cornered, stripped of their armor of wealth and intimidation. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She had waited years for this moment, and the words came like truth written on stone. 5 years ago, she said softly, "I wanted justice. Tonight, I only wanted you to treat people like human beings." You couldn't. She held his gaze for one final heartbeat. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the memo where it lay beside his untouched glass of water. Victor Blackstone remained seated, trembling hands flat on the tablecloth, staring at the evidence of his own corruption. Days later, in a small apartment in Queens, Evelyn Carter found an unmarked envelope slid beneath her door. Inside was a cashier's check, an amount so staggering it made her knees weaken. Enough to cover her sister's medical bills in full, with years of care secured beyond that. Tucked alongside the check was something else, a small golden anchor, clipped from a Hermes tie. It was not an apology. Men like Victor Blackstone did not apologize. It was not even an admission of guilt. It was an attempt to purchase silence, a desperate trade of wealth for peace. Evelyn accepted the check because her sister's survival demanded it. But the anchor she placed in a small wooden box alongside the last mementos of her father. It was not a trophy, not a gift. It was a reminder that even the mighty could tremble when truth found them. And yet the story did not end there. A week later, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The name attached stopped her breath. Michael Gray. They met in a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from the golden glow of Manhattan. Michael arrived not in a tailored suit, but in a plain sweater, looking weary but resolute. From his bag, he produced a silver flash drive and slid it across the table. "Proof," he said. "It wasn't just your father's firm. There are others. Families crushed, companies gutted. I kept records. You're the only one I trust to do something with it." Evelyn turned the drive over in her hand. Cold, metallic, heavier than its size suggested. She felt the weight of choice pressing down on her. She could walk away, vanish into quiet safety with her sister. Or she could continue down a darker road, the fight her father had once begun a fight for more than her own family. The war was not over. Table 14 had been only the first battle. The flash drive lay in Evelyn Carter's palm, small, yet impossibly heavy. Its cold surface carried the weight of more than her father's memory. It carried the broken lives of other families, other men and women who had been trampled under Victor Blackstone's greed. She stood at a crossroads. She could vanish into the quiet life she had dreamed of, caring for her sister without fear, her bills forever behind her. Or she could step forward into the storm, risking everything to drag the truth into the light, not just for Jonathan Carter, but for all those who had been left in ruins. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt choice dangerous, frightening, and real. And in that moment, a truth settled over her with the weight of destiny. True power does not live in wealth or in boardrooms, or in the sharp tongues of men who mistake cruelty for strength. True power lives in dignity, in truth, in the quiet courage to stand when silence would be easier. That night, at a forgotten table, Evelyn Carter remembered who she was. Not a server in the shadows, but the daughter of a man whose integrity outlived his ruin. And she reminded a billionaire that some debts cannot be bought off. The story of Table 14 did not end in a grand courtroom or on the front page of the Times. It ended in something quieter, but no less profound, the reclaiming of a name, the resurrection of a voice, and the reminder that even in the darkest corners, the light of truth can burn. So if this story touched you, share it with someone who thinks the little moments don't matter. They do. Leave a comment with the battles you faced in silence, the ones no one else could see. And if you want more stories where truth and dignity win out, subscribe and stay with us. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the heaviest echoes.